Wipe away your tears. Jesus is standing in front of you, calling your name. Are you hurting? Do you have a broken heart? Author radio host Bill Scott, over his 37-year career in radio, has been encouraging others with hope they are desperately looking for. But then one day, his life changed, and he needed what he had been sharing with others over the airwaves. This is his story. This is today's Nashville. This is faith. Bill Scott, what a pleasure to have you on today's Nashville. I'm turning the tables on you today.
You are.
You have been in broadcasting radio for how many years now?
I think 43 years.
43 years.
Yeah.
And 30-some years ago, I remember we were talking about
Yeah.
this. You said, Terry, do you remember when I interviewed you
Yeah.
on Dawson McAllister 30-some years ago?
That's
and I'm like, oh my
amazing.
goodness. I couldn't believe that you even remembered.
I remembered, I just didn't know it was 30 years ago. That's a long
It
time.
had to be. Yeah, about
Yeah,
30
it's
years
about right,
ago.
yeah.
Well, now I put you in the hot
All right,
seat.
I'm ready for this.
Well, tell me how it all started.
You know, I started in broadcasting, I think I was like 17. My dad was a pastor, and he came home one day, he says, I got a summer job for you. And I was like, all right, usually it's the farm. And,
Where were you living
I was
then?
in northern Michigan, up near Traverse City.
Oh,
so
we
it was
know
way
Michigan.
up there. I know you know Mackinac Island
Yeah,
and all
my
that.
husband's from Michigan.
So I lived about 45 minutes from Mackinac Island, which is in the middle of no man's land.
It is.
And so it was usually working on farm or tourist stuff. And he goes, it's working at a radio station. I'm like, well, why? And I said, what would I do? And he says, well, they need you to be on the radio. And I'm like, I've never been on the radio. And I thought, okay. And there's more cows listening than people, right? So it wasn't like anything huge, but I absolutely loved it. And I remember going home probably about 3 or 4 weeks after being in the radio studio. And I told my dad, I said, I will do this the rest of my life. I found my calling. And now, I don't know if he believed me at 17 because, you know, at 17, you're sort of in and out. But I knew for a matter of fact, I would do this the rest of my life. And now at 61, I'm still on the radio and doing it. And I love it as much as I did when I was 17.
Did you go to school, college for it? Or?
I did for a year. I went to Liberty University. It was Liberty Bible Baptist College or something. It was real small back in the day. And loved it. And my grades probably weren't the best. And Dad suggested not going back to college. And I think Liberty might have said, that's a good idea. And so I just went into Christian radio, and I have absolutely loved it. I did a little top 40 when it was like 17, 18, 19. But even in those days, I knew that I was called to Christian radio, and I didn't know anything contemporary even existed. I just heard preaching and hymns. I thought, I can't do that. That's just not my thing. Not at somebody at 19 or 20. And I found a contemporary music station in Florida, and it all started there, and I've loved it ever since.
Well, when did you become a Christian?
I was in 7th grade, and like I said, my dad was a pastor. And I remember coming home after a service and telling my mom, I said, I want to give my heart to Jesus. And I mean, I'd always gone to church, but it finally just made sense to me. I thought, you know, I don't think I've ever asked the Lord into my heart. And my mom and dad always thought that I would be in ministry. I never really thought that until Christian radio, and I could see how it would work. And I've been in Christian ministry full time since I was 19 years old and absolutely love it.
So you went from Michigan to Florida.
I did.
What happened then?
Well, in Florida, I started in radio. I was on the overnight shift and just loved it, and then started getting bumped up to different shifts. And then I had a chance to go to another radio station that was unbelievable. It was in Sarasota, Florida. And I just continued to go after it, but I always had a heart for youth. And, you know, most of these stations were for adults, all of them were actually, but they'd always give me a show on Saturday night to do a 2-3 hour rock show with, you know, like back in the day with Petra and different folks like that. And I just loved doing that. And eventually a radio station by the name of Way FM called me. And way back in the day, they were pretty much for youth all the time. And I thought, I have finally found my home. I'm at a radio station that's all they do is focus on kids. And I did that for a few years. And then I thought, you know, the nation really needs to be hit on a big level. And at the time, there was a guy, I think it was Bob Larson, was doing like some youth shows and somebody else. And I thought, no, there needs to be a live syndicated show. And that's when I hooked up with Dawson McAllister. And I did his talk show, but I did a music show on 400 stations on Saturday nights. And I just loving on the kids, had a crisis hotline for them.
So they called in?
They called in, and we'd always have artists on the show. And so they would call in, we'd talk to them. They would talk to like Toby Mac and different folks like that. And then we had a crisis hotline that was open 7 days a week. So we talked to about 100 to 200,000 kids every year, all throughout North America, Europe, and just all over.
Is there any call that you remember that just really touched your heart?
Yeah, I remember I was doing the youth ministry, and we were sending out Bible studies, and I'd written a couple of books, and I just knew there was more. And I was sitting at my computer one night, and all of a sudden, I don't know if it was like a vision, I don't know what it was, but I saw the crisis hotline working. I was not a techie guy. I mean, I didn't know anything about computers, but my brother did. And I called him, I said, I just said, I feel like the Lord wants me to do a crisis hotline, that this is a big ministry online. Now, this is in like 1997. None of this existed. And I said, where do I get the software? How does this work? And I explained it to him. He says, I know exactly what you need. He says, but it's real expensive. I said, no, God told me. And so I found this guy online. I mean, it was, I think Delta and a lot of the airlines were using this software, so it was very expensive. I figured out who the president was, so I wrote him a note, said, kids are dying. If you can sleep at night, sleep. But if you can't, it's because you need to give me your software, and we need to do this together. And 3 weeks later, this guy calls me, wasn't a Christian. He goes, I am so bothered that kids are dying, and I could help you save them. And I said, let's launch this together. And we did for about a decade, just reaching hundreds of thousands of kids. And so that was just a real calling, sort of within the calling. But you could tell it was a God-given moment, because I knew I didn't come up with the idea. It's like I saw every detail that it would take, even the tech stuff, which I didn't know tech stuff. And 4 weeks later, I had a tech guy sitting in my living room giving me all the servers and everything it took to reach all these kids.
And you were receiving hundreds of calls.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think it was at least 100,000 a year.
100,000 a year.
And we were running all sorts of interventions. We had 50,000 counselors that backed it.
Were you ever talking to them online or
I did some,
on air?
and I had a staff of about 30. And so we would run from 2 in the afternoon to midnight, 7 days a week.
Was this before Dawson or?
It was afterwards.
Okay, afterwards.
And if you remember, Dawson had the Hope line, which was an 800 line, which was really good. But I was younger than Dawson, and I was thinking, I like the 800 line, but kids are on the internet. That was a big deal back then, way before the adults were getting on the internet. And I said, I want to reach them where they're at. So I said, I want mine online. And it worked good because we were good friends. So I said, why don't we just put them together? Online or an 800 line. He ran his, I ran mine, but we did it in partnership. And I would say between the two of them, easily 250,000 kids a year we were talking to. And that was I just thought that was so cool.
We still need it today.
We do.
And then one night, you got a call from Satan.
Yeah.
And we are going to talk about that when we come back.
All right.